It started with this article over a year ago. Being late to the party is probably going to be a running theme here. And just like everyone else, I need to point out that not creating endgame combat content because of player anxiety doesn't make any sense. Genshin's entire business model is dependent on anxiety. It's how they make money. Anyway, much like my last video, this one's also largely going to be speculative. I obviously don't have access to MiHoYo's data, so the best I can do is guess. This comment got me wrinkling my brain a little, so let's try to discuss why we aren't getting endgame combat content. I remember this point being brought up a lot when this was a hot topic, and I find this to be the most likely scenario. Most people probably aren't interested. Consider the Genshin fanbase you see on Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever. These are all social media platforms where people media socially. People talk. Sometimes people talk loud. And when people talk loud with enough confidence, people will agree. I don't talk loud, so I have to boost myself in post. So, there is a chance that some people making noise about the lack of Genshin's combat-oriented endgame content don't actually do some of the combat-oriented endgame content. On top of that, I'm certain a lot of people who play Genshin aren't on social media. Let's take a look at this probably totally accurate website that definitely wouldn't lie to me. As of February 2024, we have 63 million active players. January had about 67 million. And December had 64 million, up from 63 in November. Those are big numbers. So let's take a look at possibly the least accurate analysis I have ever done in my life. If I grab the number of followers from the top 20 Genshin Impact streamers on Twitch, 20 of some of the most subscribed YouTube channels from this website, which is sorta kinda weird and I might have missed something, but it'll serve enough for our purposes, and all of the followers from every Genshin main subreddit as of the publication of this video, or at least a couple of days prior, I get almost 24 million. I chose to omit the other social media sources as I'm pretty sure they're not somewhere most people would go for guides or information, but I could be wrong. On the topic of wrong, there are a lot of things wrong with this number. There's probably pretty significant overlap. I bet you see several of your favorite Genshin Impact content creators on this list, and I'm sure you're following or subscribed to all of them. Additionally, of the streamers and YouTubers, I don't know which focus primarily on combat-oriented content or character guides, so this number is an egregious overestimate. Even if we pretend it isn't, this rather girthy number of 24 million is nowhere close to half of the reported active player count. If we look at something a little more sensible but probably pretty underestimated, we can see some user-submitted statistics for patch 4.3 Spiral Abyss, where we have a sample size of about 160,000. Now, I don't have this app because Genshin takes up too much goddamn space on my phone, so I don't know if one user can submit several clears or not, but I suspect this number is still an underestimate since I'm sure not everyone can be bothered to report these things. I certainly don't. Getting to the point, the people that would be actively searching for Genshin content for the purpose of strengthening their accounts are definitely not a majority. As odd as it may seem, Genshin is not primarily a combat game. At least, not to a lot of people. One of Genshin's main selling points is its open world exploration. Running around and experiencing new sights is kinda fun. Subjectively, of course. I know some people would rather drag their nuts through burning charcoals and lemon juice than go through Sumeru's desert again. And another one of Genshin's stronger elements is its story. Subjectively, of course.
Can you hear Paimon?
Some people commented in my last video that they've long since quit Genshin but still catch the story patches on YouTube. And I think that says a lot about how a game can make someone completely flaccid in one way but still have a certain kind of charm in another. In any event, it seems pretty plausible that MiHoYo doesn't see a significant demand for endgame combat content. Here's another oddity. MiHoYo doesn't want you to play the game. At least not too much. The more you play a game, the higher your risk of burning out. And if you burn out and decide to take a break, there is a non-zero possibility you never come back because you quit with a sour taste in your mouth. I don't know about you, but when I was naught but a humble fledgling, I remember trying to push floor 12 of Spiral Abyss as a razor main with my razor brain, but I only felt razor pain. I had to take some breaks, and I can see situations where if someone ends up getting frustrated enough, they just quit. In fact, I've known people to do exactly that. Most of my friends quit doing their Spiral Abyss, and I liked it so much, I did it for them. MiHoYo's established a system where, on patch release, your playtime spikes because you're doing the Archon quests, exploring, side quests, etc. When you've had your fill or you're out of content, you log in, do your dailies, burn your resin, and you're done in maybe 10 to 15 minutes. A somewhat recent update made it so that you could do quests, events, or open chests, and those would count towards your dailies, allowing a player to skip the tedious daily quests and jump right into the new stuff. Once you're done, you log out and play another game. One of the best things a casual game can do is allow the player to set the pace. Now, what happens if MiHoYo adds a form of difficult endgame combat content? The people who are happily not doing Spiral Abyss will continue to happily not do the new stuff. The people who are doing Spiral Abyss, snorting their Primo Gems, and slaughtering with a smile are probably going to have a field day. And the people lamenting through Spiral Abyss solely for the Primo Gems are going to lament through the new thing too. So of these three categories, only one group really benefits, and I imagine that to be a very small minority. Hypothetically speaking, let's say the people craving more bloodshed is a majority instead. What technical difficulties does MiHoYo face if they were to create harder content? Let's start with the easiest thing. Spiral Abyss Floor 13. What could this entail? Fatter enemies? Certainly one option, but an enemy is only as thick or thin as your investment level. A tanky enemy to me might not be a tanky enemy to you if your characters are built better. Relativity aside, I could argue that a tanky enemy doesn't necessarily make for an interesting one. Let's take a look at some weekly bosses, for example. The Mecha Moosh fight was cool the first time. After that, it's a lot of waiting. The All-Devouring Narwhal, kind of the same. Phase 2 of the All-Devouring Narwhal, where you get that sick drop? Probably better, I don't know, he dies too fast. Phase 3 of the Narwhal. He literally just lies there as you bend him over a table and hump him into submission. Both of these fights have mechanics you can utilize to create weaknesses and windows to attack, and these are good things. But the things you can do while you wait for those opportunities to arise are minimal, which make the fights feel, well, boring. Now Phase 2 for the Narwhal, while I'm sure is interesting, is something I basically don't have to think about because it doesn't live long enough to show its spunk. So mechanics are good, weaknesses to exploit are good, too squishy is bad, and waiting is also bad. So if too squishy is bad, then something with some beef is good. Kind of. When you fight a boss, you want it to feel like a boss, not some two-pump chump. But if it's too tanky, you make it discouraged and feel excessive anxiety. Now look at something like the Primo Geo Bishop. He's imposing, he's thick, he has consistent and active attack patterns. He even has some attacks that you can't dodge normally, leading a player to get creative with their attack expressions or run away like a coward. A fight with no downtime like that encourages players to keep hitting the enemy while also dancing around to avoid damage. It feels like a fight and not just a spectacle that loses its sheen after 1 or 2 runs. If you look at the Souls franchise or Monster Hunter, some games that are praised for their combat systems, their fights are structured largely the same way, albeit a little more punishing. That's not to say every enemy in Genshin Impact should be designed like a boss. Genshin has a number of regular enemies that also have interesting attack patterns. But let's get back to the point. What could a floor 13 entail? A lot of the newer enemies that show up in Genshin Impact often end up in floor 12. They also either generally lean towards the heavier side to reduce the effectiveness of units like Venti that allow you to group enemies easily and consolidate your AoE damage, or are immune to being crowd controlled, or more specifically frozen, so that Ayaka enjoyers can't just turn on the wood chipper and shred them to ribbons. Though some of you Ayaka chads do it anyway. Older enemies that players have adjusted to tend to be in the lower floors and susceptible to both of these things. So for floor 12, you end up having to learn to manipulate the enemy's AI and practice some strategic positioning to get them to go where you want. Then a floor 13 could be the same thing but tankier? We've already established that tankier doesn't necessarily equate to more interesting, and too tanky is bad for a player's perception of the game. Imagine a situation where a chamber has too much health for a well-invested national team to clear within a reasonable time. When someone who doesn't play Genshin Impact asks if it's free-to-play friendly, a pretty common response is yes, because there is nothing with high enough difficulty. This statement is no longer true if we factor in this new chonky chamber. So this, in conjunction with a low demand for more combat content, kind of makes a lot of sense. We might have a situation where MiHoYo believes the status of being free-to-play friendly outweighs the benefits of additional sales they might make from meta units so players can push harder content. This seems to be consistent across at least a few other Hoyo titles. People got mad at me last time for excluding Honkai Impact 3rd, but I don't play that game, so I didn't want to make any statements where I felt like I lacked insight, but apparently you get free things there too. Star Rail is also pretty generous with their stuff. I don't know about you, but I'm significantly less likely to try a game knowing that I'll hit paywalls. So, too much tankier is a no-go. How about different enemies? That seems like an option, but if they're not significantly tankier, is it really much different from floor 12? It can be if they pump the enemy's damage output up. I can see some players disagreeing with this. Being killed in one hit can be frustrating, but I played Dark Souls. I'm into that shit. Some people might try to relate this to enemies being too tanky, but instead of pulling for a stronger DPS, you might feel inclined to pull for a stronger shielder. The difference is, if you're well invested for damage, executing your rotation perfectly, and still can't clear, the content is probably overtuned. If you're dying in one hit, just dodge! The only problem I can see with adding different enemies to a 13th floor is this may end up increasing appearance frequency and therefore redundancy over several patches, depending on how they decide to do it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of sick of the Wennet. Weenut? Weenut? What about Abyss exclusive enemies? We had one. And look how cool he is. He showed up like 3 times, went out to buy some milk, and never came back. To me, Abyss exclusive sounds like a great idea, as long as it's executed properly. After all, enemies with interesting skill sets are probably difficult to develop. But new enemy attack patterns keeps combat-enthused players interested, and the spectacle of a new enemy might draw some people in to give the Abyss a shot, even if they normally wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot chow. If we keep the assumption that a healthy majority of people do Spiral Abyss, this might be worth the attention. But that assumption is wrong. Recall again that a probably small population of players actually consistently completes the Abyss. Is it really worth the development time to create something that's only going to get a few views? Maybe. I'm sure there are shortcuts they could take, like reusing the skeletons of certain enemies, reusing attack animations, etc. But considering only Hoyo has the numbers, it seems they believe it's not worth the effort. What if we step away from Spiral Abyss, call it something else to avoid the stigma for those that are scarred by it? Genshin's already created a strong foundation for a lot of potential permanent battle content like Hypostatic Symphony and Legend of the Vagabond Sword, which were basically just boss fights where you could modify their difficulty for a higher score. Or Labyrinth Warriors, which was a roguelike mode where you boogied through dungeons, picked up buffs after battles, and used those buffs against a boss at the end. I thought these were fun. A vocal portion of the community seemed to agree. But these events haven't been back in a while, at least as of the making of this video, so I question whether or not the sentiment was shared among the majority of players. Let's take a look at the structure of these events. For Hypostatic Symphony and Vagabond Sword, you chose buffs for bosses to make them more difficult, and you fought them. This is not too different from Spiral Abyss, where you choose buffs for yourself, and you fight a gauntlet of enemies. You could choose to not buff yourself, and it's almost like buffing an enemy instead. Granted, the modifiers you could apply in those events were much more extreme, which is what made them exciting to begin with, but then we have the problem we addressed earlier where people either can't clear with perfect execution or die in one hit, the latter of which I will maintain is a skill issue. What about the Labyrinth Warriors event? You boogie through dungeons, pick up buffs, and fight enemies. While I did find it fun, it's also not that much different from how Spiral Abyss is structured if you take away the boogie element. People who want more than just Spiral Abyss might find that it ends up feeling kind of the same after a few runs. But if we bring back the boogie element, we might have something interesting. If there's a time limit, you're incentivized to use units like Yelan, Sayu, Xianyin, or anyone with good mobility. However, this could limit your team building options, or maybe you didn't pull for some of the units that have exploration advantages. I can see this going either way, depending on how it's balanced. It could be interesting to choose a mobility buff to get from place to place faster when it could cost you a damage buff that might be crucial in a fight. What about something entirely different? Depends. I'm not creative enough to think of something cool. If we take Star Rail for example, and just to be clear this is not a Genshin vs Star Rail video, we have a few forms of endgame there. Memory of Chaos is probably the closest thing we have to Spiral Abyss, where you get a lineup of enemies, sometimes a couple of elites, sometimes one elite or boss with a few trash mobs, sometimes just a single boss, and sometimes just a few bugs to swat. For our fellow erudition enjoyers, we received Pure Fiction, a mode made for merry mass manslaughter. I don't believe Genshin really needs separate modes for this. There are a lot of AoE-oriented teams that can do fairly well in single-target situations, and if your AoE is limited, there are ways to group enemies, creative or not, so that you can consolidate your damage easier. MiHoYo can also continue to structure the Spiral Abyss in a way where one side is mostly single-target focused and the other side bends over for AoE damage. We already discussed the idea of a roguelike for Genshin, so we don't really need to talk about simulated universe, so why bring Star Rail up at all? Something I've been enjoying a lot was their Dream Jolt TV event. By completing certain requirements throughout a fight, you build a stacking buff. After some period of time, you challenge the final wave with your accumulated stacks. The more stacks you've gained, the more you roll the enemy. This can be a good thing or a bad thing. Seeing big damage is fun. But some people want endgame combat content specifically to see the fruits of their labor, so having a buff that's too powerful overshadows your hard work. This will likely require some careful balancing. Now you may be wondering, enemies, buffs, more enemies, is this any different from Spiral Abyss either? It can be. The Dream Jolt TV event allows you to use trial units, something Genshin also occasionally does for their own combat events. Sometimes things just die too fast. If your own units are well built, events are oftentimes not enough for you to really sink your teeth into, which means it's a little harder to feel out a rotation when you're trying a unit you don't own. Sometimes events have special buffs or weird stipulations that skew your perception of a unit. Consider a situation where you get to use a unit in a realistic setting in team compositions that are tailored to your account. Because, well, they're your characters. Players can test units on difficult content, and if that's not your thing, you can just use your standard roster and enjoy buffs, or no buffs, or I don't know. I put some thought into it, but I'm still struggling to determine if it's actually a good idea or not, mostly because I want to get back to excessive anxiety. What causes excessive anxiety for gacha players is the fear of missing out. So I propose that this content gives 0 rewards, or at most maybe first-time clear bonuses. This way, Genshin's pull economy remains unchanged, people that aren't doing battle content can continue to not do battle content, people that don't like battle content but do it for the rewards aren't pressured to continue doing it, and the people that just want to hit buttons can just hit buttons. Regardless of whether this is a good or bad idea, doesn't matter, because it doesn't really solve the engagement issue. Trial characters and Abyss exclusive enemies might draw in some new faces, but I don't think it would be significant enough to warrant the development time. And sure, you could incentivize players with rewards like Spiral Abyss, but if people didn't care about the Spiral Abyss rewards, they likely won't care much for this either. If you guys have any cool ideas for endgame combat content, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd love to see what you can cook. That being said, this is disappointing to me. I do Spiral Abyss a lot. I would love more combat content. My idea, that guy's idea, doesn't matter to me. I just want to give something a good without the risk of a restraining order. I leave it on my surveys, I left a 2-star review, and I'm hoping and encouraging those of you who want more out of the game to do the same. I know some of you think MiHoYo doesn't read surveys, and maybe you're right, but outside of writing them a strongly worded letter, my options are limited. Maybe when Hoyo says excessive anxiety, It's not a concern for their players, but a warning.